Her book club checked in at the Delmont. I followed, and another woman whispered my name. I found the key by accident, the way you find a hair that isn't yours or a receipt that doesn't line up with your calendar. It had slipped inside the lining of my wife's tote, an elegant, bone-white thing that squeaked at the handles when it was too full. I was hunting for my headphones and my fingers touched stiff cardboard. Delmont Hotel, printed in old-fashioned serif. Room number handwritten, a little flourish on the last digit, as if whoever wrote it was used to signing checks. When I asked Lucy about it, she didn't look up from the sink. She was rinsing basil, the spray arcing like glass beads across green leaves. "Oh," she said mildly, "Maya's book club booked a room there. They're doing some kind of retreat. I might stop by for an hour, haven't decided." The basil smelled like dinner in late summer. She was humming. It wasn't the tune that unsettled me. It was how much air she put in the notes, like she was saving her breath for later. We'd been married 6 years. We were the kind of couple who left post-it notes shaped like speech bubbles on the refrigerator, who knew whose turn it was to buy coffee by the weight of the jar. Faithfulness had always felt less like a rule and more like a rhythm. The Delmont key felt like an offbeat. At 6:45, I told myself I was going for a run. The sky was a bruised plum. The sidewalks held the day's heat like a secret. My feet took me not toward the river but into the bright part of town where the Delmont stands with its doormen and lacquered doors. I kept telling myself I would turn around at the next block, that I was just making sure the book club existed in a suite and not a story. I kept not turning. The lobby was all honey light and mirrors. Behind the bar, bottles glowed like exotic insects pinned in rows. I took a stool and ordered a soda with lime. If she saw me, I'd say I'd been nearby, that I was killing time before a friend's show. If she didn't see me, maybe I'd learn nothing and go home and kiss her forehead and forget I had a heart that could skid like a car on wet leaves. The elevator chimed. It's the sound I remember even now, soft, innocent, a bell at the end of school. Lucy stepped out of a cab and crossed the carpet like she wasn't touching it. She wore a dress I didn't know, a slip of dark silk that made a quiet, private music. Her hair was pinned, a few strands trailing against her neck as if they were being told a joke. She didn't look for me. She didn't look for anyone. What she did look at was the man waiting by the elevators. He had the build of someone who negotiates for a living. Not big, not small, just exactly enough. He hid his smile in the line of his cheek, and she didn't hide hers at all. When the doors opened, he pressed the button with the casual gallantry of someone who's pressed it before. And then I heard my name. "Ethan," a woman's voice said, "if you stare like that, you'll drown." I turned. The bartender wasn't behind the bar anymore. She stood next to me with a coaster in her hand, and a face I would have remembered from any day of my life, dark eyes, amused and not unkind, a mouth made for trouble. She wore the hotel's black uniform, but her hair refused the neat bun and fell in a quiet storm over her shoulder. "I wasn't starring," I said. "You were counting," she said. "Breaths maybe, or lies." "Do you often accost strangers?" I asked, an edge sharpening my voice. It wasn't her fault. I wanted someone to blame who wasn't wearing my wife's perfume. "Only the ones who whisper apologies to their drinks." She set the coaster down and nudged my glass onto it. "I'm Arya." The elevator doors closed on my wife and the man with the negotiator's shoulders. I watched the silver seam disappear. "I shouldn't be here," I said. "Of course you should," Arya said, leaning one hip against the bar. "Everybody comes to the Delmont to find what they already know." It would have been easy to bristle at that, to write her off as the kind of person who collects other people's stories and stacks them like chips. But there was something in the way she watched me, not fishing, not hungry. Curious, like a scientist who had bet on the wrong hypothesis and was delighted to be proven wrong. "You know them?" I asked, in a voice that already feared the answer. "No is a big word," she said. "I know that room number." She lifted her chin toward the key in my pocket. "I know the handwriting on the sleeve belongs to our events manager, who is very discreet except when she's in love, which is always. I know the gentleman who just went upstairs tips in cash and never finishes his drinks. And I know your wife makes eye contact as if she's checking whether floors can hold weight." "She's not." The words stuck to my tongue: cheater, adulterous, liar. They felt theatrical, like costumes that wouldn't zip. "She told me it's a book club." "It is," Arya said with a small smile. "Just not the kind with pages." She wiped a clean glass with a clean cloth just to have something for her hands to do. She wasn't rubbing salt in the wound. She was acknowledging that the wound existed and needed air. "I'm off in 10 minutes," she said. "If you want the truth, it comes easier in motion. There's a mezzanine above the ballroom. Good view of the elevator bank. Or you could go home and decide you imagine the dress." "What would you do?" I asked. "Me," she considered. "I'd go see, then I'd decide what to do with the seeing." We took the back stairs. Arya moved like a spy who enjoyed gardening, unhurried, sure of the plants. From the mezzanine, the lobby spread like a painting. We saw everyone without being seen. The elevator went up. The elevator went down. People arrived with new hair and left with last night's eyes. For a while, we didn't talk. I listened to the hotel's lungs, the sigh of doors, the soft roar of some distant heater. Once, Arya's shoulder brushed mine and stayed there. Not a promise, not a claim, just warmth acknowledging warmth. It was disarming how human it was, how much it didn't feel like betrayal to enjoy it. "Do you work here long?" I asked finally, idiotic and grateful for any words. "Long enough to know who tells the truth and who tells the kind of truth that keeps them intact." She glanced at me. "You're precise, Ethan. You look for edges. That's why this hurts, I think. It's not just the act, it's the mess in the map." "She used to love that about me," I said. "How I could take anything apart and put it back together." "Maybe she wanted a puzzle that solves itself," Arya said, with a rueful huff that might have been a laugh. At 7:30, the elevator opened, and the same man who had gone up with Lucy came back down alone. He straightened his jacket and checked his phone. He looked exactly like a person who had finished something and didn't want to be congratulated. He left a tip at the bar for no drink in particular and went back up again, empty-handed, as if he'd forgotten something. The fact that I didn't startle told me a lot about what I already knew. Arya touched my wrist. "You have options," she said softly. "People think a moment like this writes the next chapter for them. It doesn't, you do." "What would you do with the seeing?" I asked again. "I once followed a man to a rooftop where he told another woman my middle name," she said. "I went downstairs, drank water from a paper cup, and realized I was done being predictable. That was the first good decision. The second was not to let the worst thing I'd learned about him be the last thing I learned about myself." We left the mezzanine because standing still was becoming a cage. Arya led me to a side corridor that smelled like lemons and carpet glue. The ballroom doors were cracked open. A music rehearsal spilled a warm river of sound. We slipped inside the empty row at the back. On stage, a trio was practicing a slow, old love song that sounded like a lit match balancing on a fingertip. Arya held out her hand. "Dance?" she asked, daring and gentle. "I'm married," I said reflexively, like a man who still believed the ring ought to be a lighthouse. "I'm not asking to borrow your last name," she murmured. "Just your feet." We moved together under the ghosts of chandeliers. The music was soft, our steps were softer. Her palm fit against mine with the familiarity of a story I'd loved as a child. Her dress whispered when we turned. She smelled of lime and something warmer. I was acutely aware of every place our bodies touched and every place they didn't. It wasn't a theft. It was oxygen. It was proof that my pulse hadn't been a rumor. "I'm sorry," I said into the space between us. "For what?" she asked. "For not knowing how to be in this room," I said. "For wanting to be in it anyway." "Our lives are full of rooms," she said. "Some we pay for, some we inherit, some we break into. The trick is noticing which ones have windows." We stopped when the trio stopped. The pianist laughed at something no one else heard. We stood for a breath longer than necessary, and then we let go. Back in the lobby, the elevator chimed again, and Lucy stepped out alone. Her hair was less pinned than it had been. Her lip had a smudge like the smudge you get when you bite it for luck. She skimmed the bar with her gaze and then looked past it, toward the street, toward the night that would not keep her secret. She didn't see me on purpose. That, more than anything, was a sentence, and not the kind that ends with a question mark. I expected the clatter of rage, but what I felt was quieter and more dangerous, a clarity that made the floor look newly washed. I thanked Arya and meant it, and asked for her number and didn't, because the rightness of it complicated the wrongness of everything else. She wrote her name on a cocktail napkin instead, as if to say, "If you need a witness, I'm real." I walked the long way home, past the river that pretends it never remembers, past the bakery that leaves its lights on for the earliest risers. The apartment smelled like basil and cooling pasta. Lucy had beaten me there. She was barefoot at the table, scrolling her phone with the concentration she used to reserve for recipes. "You ran longer than usual," she said, not looking up. "I got lost," I said. It landed between us with the honesty of a dropped pan. She glanced at me then, sharp, as if she'd heard a cord go sour. "Are you okay?" "No," I said. "Are you?" Her mouth trembled. She bit the smudge back into place. "It's not," she began and stopped. "I didn't want to hurt you." "But you didn't want to not hurt me either," I said, and the grammar of it felt like standing barefoot on ice. She told me about the book club that wasn't, about a man from her gym, about the thrill of being seen as a person who could be chosen rather than a person who was chosen already. She said the word spark as if saying it would keep it from burning down the room. She said she loved me, she did, but she loved how she felt in elevators even more. I listened, because I owed that to the life we'd built, and because somewhere between the first fork and the last, I understood that the point wasn't to make her sorry enough to rewind. The point was to decide whether the map could be drawn again with this canyon running through it. "Do you want to fix this?" I asked finally. My voice surprised me calm, not like a surgeon but like a carpenter measuring a beam. "I want to be honest," she said, that terrible modern virtue. "Maybe we could take space, reconsider the shape of us." I thought of Arya's hand in mine, of the music, of the windows. I thought of the way Lucy hadn't looked for me at the Delmont. I thought of love as a house that requires maintenance even when the weather's good. "I don't want a shape that requires me to pretend I don't bleed," I said. "I think I'm going to stay at a friend for a while." We divided the evening like a pair of civil lawyers. I took a bag and a shirt that didn't smell like anything. At the door, she reached for my wrist and paused, as if remembering that the right to touch is a kind of word that can expire. In the hallway, I checked the napkin. I hadn't meant to take it, but there it was between my wallet and the key to a life that had begun to feel like a rented suit. Arya, a slash of ink that felt like a horizon line. I didn't call her that night. I slept on a couch that had heard better jokes. The city did its late shift outside. But the next day, when the sun drew hard rectangles on the floor, I texted a cafe address and a question mark. She answered with a yes and a winking lemon emoji that made me laugh for the first time in longer than I admitted. We met at a place with chipped saucers and the kind of music that never insists. Arya arrived in a dress that didn't whisper so much as hum. She sat and folded her hands like a prayer the church forgot to teach. We talked about unimportant things in the important way. Coffee beans, the mistake of wearing new shoes to a long party, the strange compassion we felt for strangers with grocery carts full of only oranges. The space between us thinned, not with urgency but with recognition, the way fog lifts to reveal a shoreline you suspected and hoped for. "I don't want to be a rebound," she said after an hour. "I've been gravity for too many falling things." "I don't want to make you one," I said. "I also don't want to hold my breath so long I forget I'm built to breathe." She smiled, slow and honest. "Then let's walk," she said. "Let's let the city decide whether we're a good idea or a beautiful mistake." We walked. We found a tiny park shaped like a comma, as if the neighborhood had been halfway through a sentence and changed its mind. We sat on a bench with peeling paint and traded small histories. I told her how Lucy and I had met, how I'd once thought the ability to repair a kitchen drawer meant I could fix anything, how marriage had felt like a house where spring was permanent until it was. Arya told me about the rooftop and the paper cup, and the middle name spoken to the wrong ears, about the way she'd learned to be less scenic and more sincere with herself. When she touched my shoulder, it wasn't a punctuation mark, it was a verb. I leaned in and kissed her softly, the way you knock on a door you want to be invited through. She kissed me back with her eyes open. There was nothing furtive about it. It was a yes given in daylight. Heat unfurled in me, not a conflagration but a hearth. We didn't rush. We let the moment be an orchard we didn't have to strip bare to trust. Later, much later, there would be paperwork and more music, and nights where honesty felt like a cold bath you take because your skin needs it. There would be conversations with Lucy that were braver than either of us expected, apologies that had more craft than shame, and plans drawn up with the care of architects who understand both gravity and light. But on that bench, with Arya's thumb brushing the line of my jaw as if she were making sure I was real, I felt the story I'd been telling myself shift in its chair and look out a new window. Betrayal had been the door that slammed. Desire, earned and unhurried, was the door that opened. I don't know what you think of a man who follows his wife to a hotel and then learns how to dance in a ballroom with a woman who whispers his name like a promise. I know only what it felt like to step out of the elevator of denial and onto a floor where the carpet didn't swamp me. It felt like standing at the edge of a pool at midnight and discovering that the water, after all, is warm. When Arya asked what we were doing, her hand still in mine, I answered honestly. "We're choosing," I said. "We're choosing to see and to breathe."